Hello everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. In the last episode, we saw the Queen Mother grew weaker, but she refused to give in easily in her frail state. And then they did numerous medical treatments just to keep her healthy, and she tried to continue on as she always had, so she was an inspiration. Today we're going to conclude her story, and it makes me sad, because it's been a great look at an interesting lady who served her country well and was a great daughter, sister, aunt, wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. So let's see how this story ends today. The year 2002 was the 50th anniversary of the Queen's ascension to the throne. The Golden Jubilee celebrations were due to begin with the official visits by the Queen to Jamaica, New Zealand, and Australia. Members of Queen Elizabeth's household thought that she was determined not to cause any disruption to these tours and wanted to conserve her strength a little longer. The Queen telephoned her mother every day she was away, and when she returned to Britain on March the 3rd, she went straight from Heathrow Airport to Royal Lodge to see her. Queen Elizabeth carried on and still saw people. On March the 5th, she held a lawn meet and lunch for the Eton Beagles and discussed future dates with them. Then, as usual, she held her house party for the Grand Military Race meeting at Sandown Park. On this occasion, the Queen had arranged to receive her mother's guests, but at the last minute, Queen Elizabeth appeared and greeted them herself. Her horse, First Love, distinguished himself by winning again at the race meeting, her last ever runner. She could not attend the Cheltenham races, but she watched them on television. As luck would have it, the Gold Cup on March 14th was won by Best Mate, and that was trained by Henrietta Knight, a daughter of a great friend of many years, whose name was Guy Knight. She was ecstatic, her lady-in-waiting Angela Oswald recorded. Easter fell early that year on March 31st, and by the week before Easter, Queen Elizabeth was weakening further. She was visited regularly by her local doctor, Jonathan Holliday, the apothecary to the household at Windsor, and Gil Frampton, the nursing sister at the castle, came every afternoon to change the bandages on her legs and to give her a light massage if she wished. She was not eating much now, but she might take a small glass of champagne with scrambled eggs in the evening. This reminded her of late-night suppers with the Duke in the early days of her marriage, she said. She had decided not to have a lady-in-waiting with her now, but her niece, Margaret Rhodes, came regularly to Royal Lodge from her own house a few hundred yards away in the great park. On Palm Sunday, Canon Overton held a service for her in the saloon, the room in which she had entertained so many friends over so many years. That week she made many phone calls from her bedroom. Michael Oswald was pleased to hear her, but it was clear to him that she was saying goodbye. She gave him a list of things to do and people to thank for all that they had done for her. She rang Johnny Perkins, her faithful neighbor in Norfolk and frequent visitor to May, to thank him for friezes that he had sent her, and she telephoned the Princess Royal and asked her to take some of her horses. It was obvious that she wouldn't be able to join the rest of the family for Easter at Windsor Castle. On Wednesday, March 27th, her private secretary, Sir Alistair Aird, went down to Royal Lodge to talk to her staff and to wish them a happy Easter. When Queen Elizabeth heard he was there, she asked to see him. He found her in the saloon sitting in a wing chair with her feet up and covered by a rug. He said, "I took a chair and sat immediately opposite her, for her eyesight was very bad and she had a very limited lateral vision. We discussed a few things, and I told Queen Elizabeth, who I had seen recently, and she always liked to be kept up to date with news of her household and friends. She had a smile on her face, and I suddenly had the feeling that this was the last time we would meet, and that she was in her own way saying goodbye to me." Over the next 2 days, Queen Elizabeth weakened further. By Good Friday, she was unable to lift her head from the pillow, but she remained in complete control. She asked Leslie Chappell to take a box from the drawer of her desk. In it he found a pair of cufflinks for himself and a brooch with her E.R. cipher for Jackie Meakin, a token of her affection for their care. On Saturday morning, Dr. Richard Thompson, physician to the Queen, and Dr. Jonathan Holliday came to see her. They realized she would not last a day. Dr. Thompson called first the Queen and then the Prince of Wales, who was dismayed because he was in Switzerland and would not be able to return in time to be with his grandmother. The Queen, who was riding in the park, went at once to Royal Lodge, and Queen Elizabeth was able to say goodbye to her daughter. Canon Overton arrived as Queen Elizabeth lapsed into unconsciousness. He held her hand, prayed aloud, and read her a Highland lament. I'm going now into the sleep. Be it that I in health shall wake, if death be to me in deathly sleep, be it that in thine own arms keep. O God of grace, to new life I wake. O be it in thy dear's arms keep. O God of grace, that I shall awake. Queen Elizabeth died at 3:15 in the afternoon of March 30th, 2002. Holy Saturday, a contemplative day for Christians anticipating the resurrection. At her bedside were her daughter, the Queen, and her grandchildren, Sarah Chatto and David Lindley. The following afternoon, her oak coffin went to Royal Chapel, and in the evening, Canon Overton celebrated evensong for all members of her family who could be there. Queen Elizabeth's funeral was to be the most solemn state occasion since the funeral of her husband, the King, half a century before. She had been diligent in planning it herself, and Operation Taybridge, as it was codenamed, was regularly updated. On Tuesday, April 2nd, her coffin was driven from Windsor to the Queen's Chapel at St. James's Palace, where her family, friends, and household were able to pay their respects in private. The public part of the ceremonies began on the morning of Friday, April 5th. The coffin was placed on the same gun carriage that had borne remains of her husband, the King, 50 years before, to be carried to St. James's Palace to lie in the state in Westminster Hall. The coffin was draped in her personal standard, and on it lay the crown made for her coronation in 1937. The Kohinoor diamond given to Queen Victoria, the first Empress of India, was now set in the crown of Queen Elizabeth, the last Empress, and it flashed in the sunlight. Next to the crown lay one wreath, and the card read simply, "In loving memory, Lilibet." The procession began to the sounds of Mendelssohn's Funeral March, played by the bands of the Scots Guards and the Irish Guards. As it moved off, the King's Troop of the Royal Horse Artillery started a 28-gun salute in Green Park. The boom of the guns echoed once every minute until the procession reached Westminster Hall. It was a bright sunshine spring, and there was 250,000 people lining the streets. More than 1,600 servicemen took part, marching slowly to the beat of a muffled drum as the coffin was taken down the Mall and across Horse Guards Parade, and then past the cenotaph on Whitehall to Westminster. There were contingents from all the regiments associated with her, from Britain and the Commonwealth. The Queen Mother's grandsons, the Prince of Wales, Prince Andrew, the Earl of Wessex, and Viscount Linley, together with Prince Philip, Princes William and Harry, and Peter Phillips, all marched behind the coffin. Breaking with tradition, the Princess Royal marched with them. The Prince of Wales was visibly distressed, as Deborah, Duchess of Devonshire, wrote of him. My poor friend's steely face made us all realize how much he loved her and relied on her. In the procession, Queen Elizabeth's grandchildren were followed by other members of the royal family and of the Beauce-Lyon family, her household and staff, including her Lord Chamberlain, the Earl of Crawford and Balcarres, and her private secretary, Captain Sir Alistair Aird. Among the staff who marched were her page, William Talon, her head chauffeur, John Coling, and her head chef, Michael Seeley. Then came senior military personnel, including the Chief of Defense Staff, the Chief of Air Staff, and the Chief of Naval Staff. The Queen, with her niece, Lady Sarah Chatto, drove by car to meet the coffin as it arrived at the door of Westminster Hall, exactly 30 minutes after it left St. James's, and as the last of the echoes of the 28 guns fired in salute died away. Members of the House of Lords stood along the west side of the hall, and members of the Commons along the east side, and it was led by Black Rod. The coffin was carried by the bearer party from the 1st Battalion Irish Guards into the vast and magnificent medieval space. Queen Elizabeth's coffin was placed on a catafalque in exactly the same spot where her husband had been laying in 1952. The Queen and other members of the royal family gathered around, and the Archbishop of Canterbury said prayers. 4 officers of the household cavalry then took their places around the catafalque for the first vigil of the watch. Officers from many different regiments would stand guard day and night until the funeral. As had happened with the coffin of King George V, one watch was held by her 4 grandsons, Prince Charles, Prince Andrew, Prince Edward, and Lord Linleigh. After the short service, the Queen drove back along Whitehall to Buckingham Palace. Suddenly, a ripple of applause ran through the crowd, and the Queen was clapped all the way up the Mall. It was an extraordinary moment, a spontaneous burst of popular sympathy, a recognition of all that the Queen had had to endure in recent years, culminating in the death of her sister and her mother in such a short space of time. She was visibly moved, and she said to one of those with her that this moment was one of the most touching things that had ever happened to her. That was just the beginning. For the rest of the week, the people of Britain confounded opinion makers. The government had hugely underestimated the impact of her death. People came in their hundreds of thousands to pay their final respects to Queen Elizabeth and what she had represented. The scheduled opening hours had to be lengthened to 22 hours a day. Despite the cold weather, people queued patiently, waiting their turns in line that stretched along the embankment and across the river to pass by the coffin. The Women's Royal Voluntary Service, of which Queen Elizabeth had been patron and then president, passed along the lines carrying flasks of hot tea. Prince Charles broadcast an emotional tribute to his grandmother, the original life enhancer, at once indomitable, sometimes timeless, able to span the generations, wise, loving, with an utterly irresistible mischievousness of spirit. Above all, she understood the British character, and her heart belonged to this ancient old land and its equally indomitable and humorous inhabitants. He had dreaded her death, which he somehow thought would never happen. He praised her for the fun, laughter, and affection she had created around her, for her sparklingly wonderful letters, for seeing the funny side of life. We laughed, and oh, how I shall miss those laughs. She had wisdom and sensitivity too, and she was simply the most magical grandmother you could possibly have, and I was utterly devoted to her. Her departure has left an irreplaceable chasm of countless lives, but thank God we're all the richer for the sheer joy of her presence and everything she stood for. The night before the funeral, the Queen made a short television address in which she too spoke with emotion. She said the extent of the tribute that huge numbers of you have paid my mother in the last few days has been overwhelming. I have drawn great comfort for so many individual acts of kindness and respect. She hoped that at her mother's funeral, sadness will blend with a wider sense of thanksgiving, not just for her life, but for all the times in which she had lived, a century for this country and the Commonwealth, not without its trials and sorrows, but also one of extraordinary progress, full of examples of courage and service as well as fun and laughter. This is what my mother would have understood, because it was the warmth and affection of people everywhere which inspired her resolve, dedication, and enthusiasm for life. The next morning, Tuesday, April 9th, the bearer party from the 1st Battalion Irish Guards carried her coffin from Westminster Hall into the sharp sunlight and laid it again on the gun carriage. It was drawn by the King's Troop, the Royal Horse Artillery, to the Abbey for her funeral. Some 200 pipers and drummers playing My Home and the Mist-Covered Mountains accompanied the coffin. 9 senior members of the royal family followed behind. All were somber. But their service was joyful, with lessons from Ecclesiastes and Revelation, and a reading from Pilgrim's Progress. The hymns included Amorato Invisible, God Only Wise and Guide Me, O Thou Great Redeemer. The anthem was bronze setting of Psalm 84, How lovely are thy dwellings fair. In his eulogy, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. George Carey, said that the vast crowds who had passed before her had understood that, in George Eliot's lovely phrase, there was something about her sweet presence of good diffused. He felt that the one verse of Scripture which captured her best was from the book of Proverbs. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. Her strength and her dignity were clear. Her laughter reflects an attitude of confident hope in the face of adversity and the unpredictable challenges of life. Moreover, she had a deep, simple, and abiding faith that this life is to be lived to the full as a preparation for the next. He ended by quoting again from the book of Proverbs. It says simply, of a woman of grace, "Many have done excellently, but you exceed them all." As Queen Elizabeth's coffin was borne from the abbey by the Irish guardsmen, the organ played Bach's prelude and fugue in E-flat, while high above the bells of the abbey were rung half-muffled to a peal of Stedman caters, comprising 5,101 changes. Outside the abbey, pipers from all her regiments played the Forlorn Lament, oft in the stilly night. Followed by her royal cortege, her coffin was driven up the crowded mall towards Buckingham Palace as 2 Spitfires and a Lancaster bomber flew overhead in a final wartime tribute. Along the route to St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle, thousands of people had gathered to watch her pass by for the last time. Some people crossed themselves, some bowed, others waved or threw flowers or raised glasses in a last toast. That evening, in the King George VI Memorial Chapel, in the presence of her daughter, her grandchildren, and her great-nephew, Lord Strathmore, Queen Elizabeth was laid to rest beside the king, together with the casket containing the ashes of their daughter, Princess Margaret, her epic journey finally completed. So the Queen Mother, she lived a wonderful long life. She had a love for life, a love for her country, and a love for the people of her country and the Commonwealth, and everybody felt it. I'm so glad we got to see her wonderful personality and how hard she worked and played throughout her life. One can see where Queen Elizabeth II's dedication to her country came from, first from her father and then by her mother. God bless them one and all. And then, as I've said in the last video, next we're going to go on to the life of Queen Alexandra. So I don't know very much about her, and this also should be an interesting story coming up. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't subscribed, if you could do so, it would help the channel to grow, as well as giving it a thumbs up. It's all a great help. And if you haven't clicked on the notification bell, if you could do that, it lets you know when a video is posted. More importantly, I want to wish everyone a good day. Tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you. Bye.